Hello, I'm Julie Sweetland from the Frameworks Institute, and you are tuning in to the second episode of our online video series exploring research findings from the Farming and Food Narrative Project. Thanks for joining. In this video, I'll be explaining the research methods we pursued to find new frames for farming. So get comfy, settle in. This one is going to be a little techie. I am delighted, though, to be able to share a little bit about how we work here at the Frameworks Institute. Frameworks is a nonprofit, and we're on a mission to advance the other nonprofits in the sector, to advance your capacity to frame the discourse on social and scientific issues. And we pursue this mission by conducting and mobilizing framing research. Working with partners like the Farming and Food Narrative Project, we equip experts and advocates and practitioners to lead more productive public conversations on the issues of our day. Over the past 2 decades, we have developed and deployed this theory of change. When we, as mission-driven communicators, change what we say, we shift public discourse. We change what the public hears. That, in turn, shifts public sentiment. It changes how people think. And that is really important because public opinion, public demand, public understanding are strong influences on how our institutions will respond. The way people think shapes what society will do. Given this, it's really important to get that first circle right. The issues facing farming and growers are too important to leave to guesswork. We have seen time and time again that to get that first circle right, framing questions are empirical questions. And so in the social science approach that we take to uncover empirically frames at work, we work through 2 phases. A descriptive phase, where we analyze how people think now, what people are hearing now, and a prescriptive phase, where we figure out more effective ways to communicate things that would spark new thinking. Overall, the research that we pursued in partnership with the FFNP involved at least 8 different research methods, and it sampled over 3,000 ordinary Americans. We also analyzed hundreds of pieces of news coverage and pieces of communication from agricultural organizations. So in these methods, we started on the upper left-hand corner there. We started by interviewing experts to get a handle on the science and the big ideas that the field wanted to communicate. We then went and talked to non-experts about those same issues. And to do this, we conduct in-depth interviews with the public. And we use a technique called cognitive analysis to surface patterns in talk and identify the assumptions that show up again and again. We also systematically analyze the way news covers farming practices, and environmentally friendly farming methods. We wanted to see what the public hears about these issues. And we also analyzed a sample of the way agricultural researchers, trade associations, and advocates were talking about those topics. With all that descriptive data in hand, we were ready to move to the prescriptive phase. We began by comparing the field story, public thinking, and public discourse to develop a set of communications tasks and hypotheses. What assumptions needed to be shifted? What framing strategies might work for that? Where did the public even lack a mental model of how something works? So that means there's a new understanding that we need to really build up almost from scratch. We generated hypotheses about how to accomplish those various outcomes. And at this stage, we develop different framing tools, different ways of explaining an issue, different types of examples, and so forth. And then we systematically tested those hypotheses and tools through a set of methods. First, through a small set of rapid interviews, on the street or on the screen interviews, and then in small group settings, a little bit like focus groups. We also deployed a larger scale, randomized controlled survey experiments, and did additional small group sessions. All told, this project queried over 3,000 people and reviewed over 200 pieces of communication. So that's the overview of methods. I'm going to go through some of these one by one. All right, so the expert story. Our process begins with nailing down the expert perspective or the field's key concepts. Many communication initiatives skip this step because they're taking a marketing approach that's essentially finding ways to talk about topics that the public will, quote unquote, like. Now, we're all for messages that resonate, but what we at Frameworks want to do first and foremost is to find ways to get the science to resonate. We want to translate that science in ways that are accessible and accurate and lead people to think in new ways. We want to build and deepen public understanding so that the public is less likely to fall prey to misinformation or spin, and more likely to support evidence-based solutions. We want people not just to like what we're saying, but to be overall better equipped to play their role as an informed citizen in our democracy. So we begin by making sure that our researchers are translating ideas with good, solid evidence and agreement behind them. So we do that by interviewing a panel of leading voices on a topic and distilling underlying themes. So for this project, we conducted 17 interviews. Each was an hour long. Those interviews included chatting with crop farming experts like academic researchers, policy experts, extension specialists, and growers themselves. We conducted these between December 2016 and June 2019. We distilled recurring themes, really seeing what people were saying, what kept coming up again and again. That helps us see the basic assumptions and concepts that people in this field rely on. And then we presented that analysis to a larger group of experts and practitioners and adjusted it based on feedback. That feedback is why there's such a long period of interviews, kind of December 2016 and June 2019. We did a first round and actually went back and got more data and revised the story quite significantly. Okay, once we have a handle on what you want to say, what are the big ideas, we want to go and figure out how do people hear and think about those same ideas. So we investigated cultural models of food and farming. In this method, cultural models analysis, we take a big scoop of language and the memorable phrase of one of the anthropologists that pioneered this method. So we conduct in-depth, semi-structured individual interviews. Each lasts up to 2 hours. We did these in 2018. We took interviews in 4 different states or regions. There were 6 participants in each state and region, so 24 participants. And this led to nearly 1,000 pages of transcribed interview data. So who did we interview? Well, this method involves a small number of people. We pack as much diversity into that sample as we can. So we had diversity in terms of age, in terms of education. We intentionally had a sample of folks that were people of color and not a majority white sample. That was by design. Our gender split was pretty even. We had a range of income backgrounds, pretty much tracking the American population, as well as in terms of we had both an urban, suburban, and rural people in the mix. And we had a mix of people who said they were Republican, people who said they were Democrat, or people who described themselves as independent. So you can take a look at that, and you could definitely look at these demographics more in the research study. And we'll say that something interesting about this sample, 100% of them reported significant experience with eating food. All right. So comparing the expert story with the public story, to map this public thinking, we can kind of summarize what's here in this way. So the field defined farming, talked about farming as a complex expert practice with lots of tricky, difficult, contingent decisions. The public says it's hard work and there are risks, but it's ultimately simple, kind of plant, tend, harvest. When we talked about, when we asked about the effects of farming and the effects of farming practices, experts in the field said, well, there are lots of effects. They have economic impacts, environmental impacts, health impacts for the workers and for to a lesser extent for consumers. The public was very much focused on, well, the way the food is grown affects, the way, the health of people who eat it. What is good farming? Expert says that's a tough question, hard to say. It depends on the context. Really, there's a diversity of approaches and practices that can meet those economic, environmental, health, and other human goals. The public talked about natural farming being the best. The food that was least kind of disturbed by human hands was the best, and they often knew the term organic as that thing. When we asked about sustainability, experts in the field said this is a core concept. It is, essential, right, to how we think about this work. For the public, it was a missing concept. Some people knew the term. I don't want to suggest that it was a completely unfamiliar term, but if they did know the term, they equated it simply with environmentally friendly practices and did not have a social dimension of that, and much less so an economic dimension to that. So really kind of environment only, green kind of practices. When we asked what shapes those practices, experts in the field said, well, that's a complicated question. There's a lot of things. What's best for that crop? What are the threats to that crop in the moment? What kind of risk can that farmer take? As well as other things. The public said it's really just, farmers decide what to grow based on what people want to eat. And if just that demand shapes supply in a very simple kind of way. And if we probed a little further on that, they might say, well, it comes down to the farmer. Maybe if they are very, virtuous and committed to the environment, their own ethics and care for the land would drive them to do something, more environmental, or pay their workers extra or something like that. But it was very a very simplistic understanding. We asked about pest management and pesticides for multiple reasons. One, it's a core kind of consideration, right, and for growers, but also because one of the original kind of the origins of this project came out of concerns at IPM Voice and the integrated pest management field more broadly. So when we asked experts, they said, well, there's a diversity of pests and strategies, and pesticides are one tool in that overall broad toolkit for ensuring, that crops are protected from insects, diseases, weeds, etc. When we asked the public about pests, they didn't want to think about it, but they immediately associated the term with pesticides, insects, and chemical pesticides to kill them, and talked about how it was never acceptable. It goes back to that point of really thinking about what's a good crop through the lens of consumer health and the conception that organic farmers don't use pesticides, or at least don't use chemical pesticides. So that was where that conversation went with the public. We also asked about soil management, and as that is, kind of, again, key to effective farming operation. Experts in the field said it was a central concern. The public, that was a missing concept. It was really off the radar. People did not have a way to think about soil health. A couple of other things that we noticed is that when we talked to experts, they were consistently talking about innovation, update, research, new practices, things we need to do to build and rebuild the field. There was an orientation towards the future. The public had a past-facing orientation, nostalgic and romanticized in some ways. But when people think about farming, they're thinking about the pictures of the kids, in a child's picture book, right? A very homestead farm, one cow, one pig, and some corn in the background, right? A kind of a simplified and again old-timey kind of a view of farming. All of this matters, not just because it's academic and interesting, although it is academic and interesting, but because we have solutions that we need to pursue, changes we need to make in order to sustain the future of farming. And we asked experts about farming. They said lots of things, but one of the most consistent was we need to continuously invest in research to meet the challenges that are ahead. The public didn't really have a way to think about solutions. If pressed, they said, well, we need to make sure that those farmers are not putting anything on the food that could hurt us. tougher regulation of any harmful practices. All right, so with this type of analysis, we dug a little deeper into the descriptive. This is how people are thinking, and has shaped the hypotheses that we developed and tested in later stages. But we also took one more look, not just on how people are thinking, but what are they hearing? We conducted a media and field frame analysis, working to understand the current discourse around farmers and farming practices. So we analyzed the framing in news media because this source of information has a powerful effect on what the public hears, thinks, and understands about an issue. We analyzed a sample of just over 100 news articles about farming that appeared in 2019. And we analyzed the framing that organizations in agriculture themselves are doing, with a particular focus on scientific and academic organizations, issue advocacy groups, and trade groups. Our analysis focused on 3 questions. How are farming and its impacts portrayed? How are farmers portrayed? And how is pest management portrayed? So those findings will inform, again, the content in this video series throughout. If you want to hear more about those methods in particular, you can go to the research report. So that's the descriptive phase, how people think now, what they're hearing now, and now we move into the prescriptive phase, reframing research, how to spark new thinking. We begin with designing some candidate frames, what might work. Our researchers collaborated with Farming and Food Narrative Project members to develop multiple framing strategies to explore and test. So this was a lengthy and involved process. Some examples of what I mean by candidate frames. These are framing strategies that we think are plausible and probably will work, or that we have a suspicion, based on the field frame analysis that people are using, but they won't work. They will have a unintended backfire effect. Here are some examples. We developed we developed candidates for values. Ideas like shared responsibility, interconnection, and fairness. Metaphors. We thought about talking about farmers being squeezed by multiple pressures based on the metaphor of cost-price squeeze. Or balance. Farmers must balance many things while crossing a tightrope. Or a difficult journey that farmers today are walking a rocky road. We developed and tested different ways of positioning the issue, kind of thinking about like the way journalists have different beats. What do we want to associate? What's the angle on the topic of farming and sustainable agricultural practices? Is this issue about human health? Is it about the economy? Is it about the environment? Is it about climate change? If we talk about it in the lens of those issues, through the lens of those issues, does that make people think it's more important, more salient? Do they pay more attention? And then we developed quite a few deep dive examples and explanations. How can we explain integrated pest management? How can we explain economic pressures on farms? How can we give examples that show that farms aren't just, factories pushing out food, but they are part of communities, central in communities, connecting into their communities? So those are the inputs, and then we had to develop outcomes, right? Examples of the communications outcomes that we are testing for and looking for as we do both qualitative and quantitative research. So here on the screen are 3 items from the survey experiment. That's the quantitative method. When a frame works, it builds thinking in these important ways: knowledge, attitudes, and policy support. An example from a lengthy instrument, but one example of an item that would test knowledge is: farming is a complex profession that mostly requires scientific knowledge and specialized technical expertise. We would say a frame works if it is increasing the level of agreement with that statement. An attitude question might look like this: sometimes farmers can't adopt sustainable farming practices even if they want to. We would want to see the level of understanding of that increase. And then the third type of outcome, policy preferences. Here we aren't testing for name brand legislation or even very precise policy moves. We're more talking about them in general terms of the types of things experts said we needed to move toward in order to make the system stronger. So one example of a policy item is here: even if it means raising taxes, We should make it easier for farmers to finance and insure crops that are grown in ways that protect water and soil health. So this is, translating, crop insurance changes or reforms into everyday language. And we'd want to see the level of support for that type of idea to increase. So knowledge, attitudes, and policy preferences that are really about the common good, the public square. You'll notice we are not testing for what would you buy, how much would you pay for. This isn't market research, it's public thinking research. All right, so those are our methods and the outcomes we're testing for. How do we test them? The first method is on the screen interviews. We conducted 50 brief virtual individual on-camera interviews in April 2021. The project we did before this one, they were on the street interviews. That's typically how we have run this method for close to 25 years. But a little thing called the pandemic happened, and we had to retool our entire research approach that was based on talking to the public. So this worked out beautifully though. With 50 folks, we can have a more representative sample reflecting the diversity of demographic positions in the United States. And this set of interviews, on the screen interviews, focused on metaphors. So we tested, is it talking about how farmers are on that rocky road, a difficult pathway? Are they on stormy seas? Are they balancing on a tightrope? Are they being squeezed by pressures? Are they walking into a headwind when we wish they had a tailwind? From this, we can winnow and refine the metaphors and take them into further testing. That further testing is a large-scale survey experiment. It involved 3,155 participants with a nationally representative sample. And folks were randomly assigned, this is an online experiment, people are randomly assigned to a treatment group, and they get they get one treatment, one message, one framing condition. So there's a control group, and there are groups that get different metaphors, groups that get different values, groups that get different explanations of IPM, different explanations of the role of food and community, different ways of talking about inequities that face farming, and also play out social inequities that play out on farms, race, gender, immigration, etc., and ways of talking about the environment, climate change, and so forth. So we then, depending on people, read a message with one of those framing strategies embedded in it, and then they go into a survey that has those types of questions I just showed you: knowledge, attitudes, and policy supports. Because we have a large demographically representative sample, because people are randomly assigned, because people are getting a precise and minimally differing treatment, and we have a control group, they're all being asked the same outcome questions. With all of that, we can be confident that if we're seeing differences in responses, it's about the frame, right? Not about what they thought or who they were when they got there. So this is a strong design to lead us to frames that we can recommend with confidence. But we don't stop there. Often the survey experiment leads us to say, that's interesting, why? Or, that's really powerful, I wonder how we could extend that. So we then follow up with something like focus groups. These are peer discourse sessions. We're really looking to how people think in groups, how they talk in groups, how one person's thinking can affect another, and how you can move an entire group of people, right, toward more scientific and accurate ways of understanding an issue. So we conducted 4 small groups. Each was 120 minutes long. Each session had 6 participants. They came from different places in the western region of sustainable agriculture research and education, as Western SARE funded this part of the study. And again, we're not just asking people what they like, we're putting people to work to think with this. So this is a qualitative approach to exploring public discourse and public thinking. And they have scenarios. They begin with open-ended discussions about farming, and then the moderator introduces framed passages or primes that are designed to influence the talk and the discussion in specific ways. And we're recording these so we can analyze it. There's group exercises in which participants break out into smaller groups, and they have some kind of job, like imagine you're presenting, which argument is the strongest, that sort of thing. So that was the last method that we conducted in this particular series of studies. Overall, this was a comprehensive investigation, 6 different data collection and analysis steps that form the basis of our recommendations. Over 3,000 people in the sample, over 200 pieces of public discourse about farming that we interviewed. And so I hope this video has really given you a firmer understanding and I hope more confidence in how we pursued this study. If you want even more detail, it's available in these reports. And I hope you'll keep learning along with us. You can explore our resources, including the next video in this series, at farmingandfoodnarrative.org and also at frameworksinstitute.org. Thank you for your interest and your time today.